Hello, in this video we're looking at sentence structure, what we know often as syntax. In particular, we're looking at the sentence elements. Sentence elements break down into various little structures, but today we're going to look at probably what is the most famous or the most classic, or if you like, the most basic. It's this one, subject-verb-object. In a sentence, and we're talking about a simple sentence here, so that's a sentence with just one clause, more on clauses later. You have a subject doing something, so there will always be some kind of an action going on here. We used to think of verbs as doing words, did we not? Doing something to an object. Now we're going to look at it in relation to a little fragment of child language, and then also very briefly at a more sophisticated text aimed at adult readers in newspapers. But can we just pause on this for a moment? Subject, verb, object, action. I just wanted to add in one more thing, which was that we do need to have something called a transitive verb. It's very important that the verb is transitive in a subject-verb-object construction. As in, for example, they raised. What did they raise? They raised the flag. This is a transitive verb in action. She fired. What did she fire? She fired the gun. A transitive verb then basically is a verb that requires an object. It asks for an object. One way to think about it is to say, well, if I stopped after the first part and then said what, and then answered it, then you're probably looking at a subject-verb-object construction using a transitive verb. So they raised. What did they raise? They raised the flag object. She fired. What did she fire? She fired the gun object. Transitive verb. What is an intransitive verb, you might ask? Well, intransitive verbs are all over the place. If you say, for example, she laughed, yes, or he cried, in that instance, you don't need to have an object afterwards. You don't need it. You can just put your full stop right there. Yes, Jesus wept, one of the shortest sentences they reckon in the Bible. She laughed. You can say she laughed hysterically, or she laughed ironically, if you like. That's not adding an object. That's just telling you how she laughed. You could say she lived in the village. Yes, again, that's not an object, so it's just telling you where she lived. More on that later on. So, looking briefly then at this little fragment. This is taken from this transcript here, where Joe has been given a toy Sheriff Woody from Toy Story. And in this particular instance, the toy is talking to Joe and says, "I'm Sheriff Woody." At which point Joe replies, partly to the toy, partly to himself maybe, "I shoot the baddie." How does the subject-verb-object break down here? Well, you've got I. Got to be the subject, hasn't it? Shoot. Got to be the verb. And you have to say, well, what is he shooting? Well, he's shooting the poor old baddie. Subject-verb-object. Now, you will find subject-verb-object constructions relatively often, just as they are in child language transcripts. And that's because they're quite simple, because children, particularly once they move out of the two-word stage into the three-word stage and start to really acquire language at a greater speed, they start to be able to break up to construct sentences with all those elements to them. Basic though they are, you won't find much in the way of subject-verb-object just purely on its own in a more sophisticated text. This one's by Caitlin Moran. I've got one here. The Beatles created a whole new world, and in fact there are a few others dotted about in the text, but they're always crowded out by other things. They're in longer sentences, longer clauses, and there's lots of other things going on. So it's probably best to look at subject-verb-object construction, thinking about it more in relation to those very early constructed sentences of young children. Thank you very much.